All right, welcome everyone to a very special episode of the Liberty Advisor podcast. Today happens to be the 10-year anniversary of the Bitcoin Genesis block, and we have the world exclusive interview with Lyn Ulbircht, whose son Ross, love him or hate him, has probably done more for the adoption of Bitcoin than anyone on the planet. Lyn Ulbircht is a political activist and advocate for individual freedom, privacy, and criminal justice reform. She is also the mother of Ross Ulbricht, who is serving a double life without parole for all nonviolent charges associated with his role in the Silk Road website, which was arguably the first proof of concept for Bitcoin. Having seen her only son caged after a trial riddled with proven corruption, and we're going to get into that because I see a lot of corruption, and this is probably one of the most corrupt cases I've ever seen, which is saying a lot. Lyn is dedicated to fighting not only for Ross's freedom, but for the thousands who have been victimized by the flawed U.S. criminal justice system and drug war. She strives to direct awareness to the important precedents set with Ross's high-profile case, issues that will impact freedom and privacy in the digital age. Lyn has spoken at numerous events in several countries, appeared on many TV, radio, and podcast shows, including Reason TV, CNN, HuffPost Live, and Fox, and has been interviewed by major alternative media, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, BuzzFeed, John Stossel, and The Guardian. She is also prominently featured in the documentary Deep Web. While not working to raise awareness and support, Lyn focuses on raising funds for legal fees and gaining signatures for Ross's clemency's petition on www.freeross.org. And if you guys go to Free Ross, I'd highly encourage everyone to sign the petition and watch Railroaded, the targeting and caging of Ross Ulbricht. Actually, I watched it probably about 3 weeks ago, and I was only going to watch the first episode or two because I was getting busy, and it was so crazy, just the amount of new information to me, and I'm pretty up on this stuff, that I just couldn't actually, I couldn't resist, and I actually had to watch the whole thing at once. And by coincidence, my good friend Ernest Hancock of freedomsphoenix.com has been on me forever to watch the Kim.com documentary. So then I watched the I forgot what it was called. I think it's called Caught in the Web. And so those were just two great ones to watch back to back because there are so many overlapping issues with how the U.S. government, if they want to get you, really the links that they're going to go to get you. And when Lyn and I had originally set this up, I guess we didn't even realize today was the 10-year anniversary of the Bitcoin Genesis block. So we definitely are, pleased to have Lyn on the show. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Lyn on was to kind of take a different approach than what you usually see. A lot of times when I've seen interviews from Lyn, it's from, either the crypto community, which, basically are going to treat Ross like an absolute god, or it's from, the other side of things where, they're trying to do like I gotcha type interviews of, hey, we're going to take out this sound bite and make, create the story that we're going to create anyways. And I wanted to take a little bit different take on this. And because I know I have got a lot of conservative people that follow me, and the first thing they say is, how can you support a guy who, is hiring a hitman? And how can you support, all this murder for hire? Because, this wasn't just a simple website. This was, a criminal mastermind who was out there, basically like Pablo Escobar. And I see a lot of basically parallels between, how the media portrays Donald Trump and how they portray Ross Ulbricht, which might be a weird thing to say, but if you're going off of the media's perception of Donald Trump, and if you are a Trump supporter, you realize there's a gigantic disconnect there. I mean, if you talk, and I hate even saying this, but if you talk to some people out there, the whole justification, some people think that Donald Trump is a Russian agent and basically Vladimir Putin has the goods on him, and the goods on him involve, this whole Russian gate PP dossier that they think that, and I hate even talking like this, but the mainstream media pushes a narrative that, Putin has tapes of Donald Trump getting peed on by Russian hookers. And this is like, and so some people, especially in the crypto space or the libertarian space, might not even know that this is like what the government and mainstream media argues about. But if you go off what the mainstream media says versus the reality of things, it's, a greatly different, actual reality of what actually happened. And so when you get into, and so I don't want to, paint Ross as, he's an absolute god, or he's, the second coming of Jesus, but his case though is, there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. Doing what he did, I would expect that, if I were to create a website like that, I would expect that if I were to be found out or caught, that I would expect to get into some trouble. Now, I would not expect to have a double life sentence with no chance of parole, especially when you compare it to all the criminality that goes on that isn't prosecuted. on a day-to-day basis. But anyways, before I guess I keep rambling, I want to introduce Lyn to the show, and thank you so much for being with us today, especially on this anniversary of the Bitcoin Genesis block.
Oh, it's great to be here. Yeah, good to talk to you. We had a great talk in Las Vegas at the Bitcoin conference there, and so I've been looking forward to talking some more.
Yeah, so Lyn and I, we had originally met at, it was actually the first crypto conference I ever went to, was in the Nexus Earth conference in Aspen, Colorado. And at that conference, it was just an absolute who's who of everyone who was there. And the first person I just happened to talk to when I first got to the hotel with Ernie, we were standing outside, and I look over and it's Lyn Ulbircht. And then I think you were talking with, I think it was Sterling Lujan of
Oh yeah, he's
Bitcoin,
a good friend. Yeah, as is Ernie.
Bitcoin.com.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And but that conference, though, just a quick shout out to Colin Cantrell, the founder of Nexus.
Yes,
I mean, it
he's a
had
great guy. Mm-hmm.
everyone who was there. I mean, it was Ron Paul, Judge Napolitano, Jesse Ventura, Max Kaiser, Doug Casey, Roger Ver, the Ethereum co-founder, I can't remember his name, I think Joseph Lubin, Peter Schiff, Lauren Southern, Jim Cantrell, the founder of Vector Space, the whole Nexus team, Luke Rudowski, Terry Brock, Sterling Lujan, Jeff Berwick. I mean, the list, I mean, this was just such a star-studded event. And I'm trying to think who, there's the other Democratic senator, I can't, not senator.
Dennis Kucinich.
A former congressman who, when it comes to Democrats, there's not a lot that I really get along with or agree with anything they say. And I remember telling him, you're the only Democratic congressman that actually, agree with on anything, and actually, do respect him. So it was just such, a who's who, and I'm probably missing like 30 other big people of that type of caliber. So anyways, no, that was a great conference, and I met you there, and you were the first person I met at a crypto conference. So I thought it was just, fitting that now our paths have crossed again, and you will be at Anarchapulco speaking there as well, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right, and I look forward to seeing you in a much warmer locale, because I'll be there as well. And today it's actually freezing. It's actually below freezing right now in Phoenix. So it is. It was 29 degrees, which I don't know if that's happened.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So all the global warming that's going on. So thank you, thank you, Al Gore. So we'll be doing our part, I guess, when we go to Acapulco. But anyways, I also want to make sure people go to freeross.org, sign the petition. It's already up to, I think it's like 115,000 signatures.
No, it passed 116, I think, yesterday. And I actually didn't look at it this morning yet, but no, we're getting a wonderful response. So grateful to everyone who cares about the injustices going on in our criminal justice system. And I think, your point about the fake news that the president has been subjected to is absolutely applicable to Ross. I've gotten a firsthand, up close and personal view of it, and it's absolutely appalling and terrifying, because it's kind of like Pravda. It's in the media, much of the media, not all, much is an arm of the government, and spouts whatever they want to do politically. And I think we're really in trouble that way, because too many people just take it at face value what they read. And I've learned I practically don't believe anything I read until I, can really dig into it, and I've been misquoted. I have had things pieced together to make a completely different meaning. I've had things omitted. And also, of course, in Ross's case, for example, you brought up the murder for hire allegation, never charged at trial, never indicted by New York, who brought him to trial. Jury never ruled on it. But if you read the media, you think that was the only thing, and that was what he was in prison for. And then they even just call it murder, as if someone died, which that did not happen. And this is something that the media does. It's something the government does. And I've talked to defense attorneys. I've talked to other people who have had this done to them, and they say it's almost routine to smear someone with a more egregious charge that they never, not even a charge, allegation, and then the media picks up on it, and that becomes who they are, and then they're not charged with it. It's not ruled on by a jury. It's not a conviction. And my question is, so why even have a trial? Why even have, the whole process of our justice system, if Chuck Schumer, who pre-trial came out and said Ross was guilty without a trial, with no proof, in a public letter to Eric Holder. Congratulations, you got your man. And I'm like, oh, I see. So what happened to the presumption of innocence? Well, that's gone, because I guess if Chuck Schumer says it's true, it must be true, because he was completely behind this case. I'm going to go into that later, but point being, and then the media picks up on it, and even the judge, who, by the way, was recommended by Schumer for her position, used uncharged allegations to justify this draconian sentence that they gave my son, who, for all nonviolent charges, and very poorly proven. And that is actually was a question that was brought before the Supreme Court by one of the top law firms in the United States, Williams and Connolly, saying, wait a second, a judge isn't supposed to decide something's true based on what prosecutors say. That's why we have juries. That's why the Sixth Amendment was written, to protect the accused from rogue judges and judges who decide they know better. And yet she has gotten away with this. And by so doing, and by many of the other egregious things that have happened in this case, it puts us all in peril. We all lose our Sixth Amendment protections. We all lose our First Amendment protections, which were also violated. We all lose our Fourth Amendment protections. It's not just Ross. It's all of us when this happens in the courts. And so it's really a much bigger situation than, a website that a kid in his 20s, idealistic, Ron Paul supporter, totally on fire for freedom and free markets and Bitcoin and wanting to, having good intentions. I've never thought that wasn't true. I know my son, but also it's obvious. And maybe, you can say misguided or overzealous or, you don't agree about the drug war, his view on the drug war at the time or whatever. But, that's one thing. But what has been presented and how our Constitution's been trampled on by this case and many others is what people really need to pay attention to, because we're losing our freedoms very quickly.
Yes, and whether you agree with Ross or not, I mean, you've got to, and I protect, the rights of people to say things of people that I don't even agree with, because I know if they can come after them, then they can come after me. And so,
Exactly.
even though, I don't think anyone should be doing heroin or meth or any of these other hardcore drugs, I think people are going to get their hands on them anyways, and that the drug war actually does more to basically to bring more harm into society, and more people end up dying because of the drug war than if the drug war hadn't existed. And there's all sorts of research where I think Portugal legalized the drugs, and next thing you know, they went from the highest drug usage in Europe to the lowest drug usage because they focused on rehabilitation. I've written articles on this, and there's so many things that you touched on. I mean, even you get back to the hypocrisy of Chuck Schumer, who's actually my graduation speaker. I mean, of all people, and the only reason he was my graduation speaker is because it was supposed to be Elliot Spitzer, but he got caught with his prostitute like the day before he was supposed to be my graduation speaker. So Chuck Schumer was like the pinch hitter to come in to give my graduation talk. So somehow I was able to survive all of that propaganda. But it was Chuck Schumer who basically recommended it to Eric Holder. But Eric Holder was involved in shipping guns into Mexico, to then subvert the Second Amendment, which is one of the ones I guess you didn't name. And if it wasn't for I guess the only thing the government's not subverting is they're not quartering troops in our houses is pretty much the only thing that's not going on. But I shouldn't give them any ideas over here. And bringing up the the hitman charge, I believe you had a world exclusive interview with it was with Danny Sessom of the Crypto Show at World CryptoCon, where you actually had an interview where it was you and Curtis Green both in the same room. And I'm not an expert on this, and there's so many things I keep track of that I can't keep track of everything. But wasn't Curtis the one who was the alleged supposed to be on the receiving end of getting the hit by Ross, and even he's saying it was a false accusation? I mean, and then
he's come out and supported Ross. He's come out and said he doesn't believe Ross did it, and he's giving some of the proceeds from his book to our cause. And how often does that happen? That the victim supposedly, is because he knows that it isn't true. And as I said, I've had defense attorneys tell me that this happens this happens all the time. I've had people say, hey, they did this to me. This is our government. This is America. And prosecutors are running the justice system, as far as I can tell, running the trials. And I've been told by a former prosecutor, they will lie, they will cheat, they will do whatever it takes for them to get their trophy. And this undermines all of our protections and freedoms. It's absolutely terrifying. And
Absolutely.
they're political, and they just care about their careers, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. So, yeah, and just like you were saying, how many times the person who is, alleged to be, the one who is supposed to be, receiving the hit, the one who was murdered,
Yeah.
who then comes out and says, no, that was not the case. And I guess getting into it, I don't remember all the details from Railroaded just yet, because, a lot of things going on.
It's a lot of details. Yes.
Well, I mean, just a ton, and I'm sure that there's a ton of details that were probably left out in that as well. But, there was government, I mean, I guess, the high level version is you had, one government agent who, was trying to track down, who was behind Silk Road. And it seemed like all the signs were leading to another guy who was actually the one who was doing a lot of the technical expertise behind it. And I didn't even know this until recently, and it's so weird that this has been brought up. But like the past month, I have never heard of the Princess Bride before. And the past month, I have probably had this intersected to my life like 10 different ways. It's just
how weird.
It's just so crazy because I think I found out that DPR was from the Railroaded movie documentary was based off a character Princess Bride in the Dread Pirate Roberts, and hopefully I'm not butchering this because I haven't seen the movie. He was a character who, once he trained his disciples, would then sort of step away and sort of have more of a hands-off approach, or because he would have passed down his, I don't know, his powers or his likeness to somebody else.
It was meant to be passed on. It was as a baton. It was meant to be passed on from person to person to person.
And it sort of seemed like Ross more than likely created it, but then didn't have the technical know-how or expertise or ability to actually run this. And so he was sort of like, it's sort of like, if you want to go blame Roger Ver for Bitcoin and saying just because, I guess now it'd be Bitcoin Cash, but because he has the philosophical, hardcore, libertarian, Rothbardian view of the world, that all of a sudden, Roger Ver should be in jail for Bitcoin, when, then there's a lot of people in this community who are the ones who are actually building up Bitcoin. It has nothing to do with, Ross was the central figure of getting.
Yeah. They wanted a trophy. That's what they wanted. There's lots of dark web markets now. I don't hear about them doing much about them. They got their trophy. They got their political capital. Preet Bharara, who was, Schumer's counsel for years and was his basically collaborator. He was the lead prosecutor. The judge, as I had mentioned, was recommended by Schumer for her position on the bench. Ross has nothing to do with New York. He was arrested and lived in California, but he was basically extradited back to New York for trial in the Southern District of New York, who is now persecuting President Trump, by the way. President Trump and Ross have a lot of the very same enemies, including Mueller, who was his FBI, including Comey, and and the media. I mean, so I'm hopeful that the president can understand what we've been dealing with. Because if they do this to a president, please, a 20-something kid who, idealistic kid, you think they're not going to say whatever they want and do whatever they want? They also used illegal Fourth Amendment. They violated the Fourth Amendment with spying. Well, they did it with Trump too. William Binney, who is an NSA whistleblower, an expert, he worked for the NSA top level, has said this, not about Ross, but just about how this was done with the president, and actually Elliot Spitzer as well, you mentioned him. But I mean, and what you said in the beginning, they will get you if they want to, and they will use whatever means. Now, one of the things I really want to say is that we are at a crossroads in history right now. We are at a tipping point in our country. Are we going to be free or not? Are we going to have rule of law or not? And we're really right there. And in the courts is one of the places. And they're just shoehorning 20th century law into the 21st century in the digital age. And in the process, we're losing our protections. And that's a whole other subject. But we're at a very, very vulnerable and tenuous position with privacy, with all the things that we're dealing with. And it's up to us which way we're going to go. In this case, a lot of things come together in this case that spotlight this. And so I really want people to understand the drug war is not about drugs. And it's obvious. It's been going on for over 45 years. It's cost taxpayers over $1 trillion with a T dollars. People are still using drugs. They can't even keep drugs out of the prison. They know this, they meaning the government, they know it doesn't work, but there is a lot of money being made and a lot of rights and protections being shredded with the drug war and the drug exceptions that they make. And it's drugs, so it's okay. Who cares about the Fourth Amendment? Who cares about, well, that all spills over into everyone's lives. And just like prohibition of alcohol increased violence, so does prohibition of drugs. All the cartels, all the gangs, all the stuff that is causing so much violence and ruining countries like Mexico would stop. You don't have Smirnoff and Absolute having street fights over who's selling their vodka where anymore, because it's not illegal. It creates violence and it doesn't work. And as you mentioned, Portugal, my husband actually talked to someone from Portugal and he said, before we legalized drugs, decriminalized everything, it was becoming extremely dangerous, really bad there. And now it's wholesome and it's safe and it's having a renaissance. Because ironically, prohibition creates crime. So there's a money incentive. There's this incentive. So that's a lot of stuff I just covered. But point being, I'm not for drugs. Don't do drugs. Bad idea, But the drug war is horrible. And I'm not even defending Silk Road, or for that matter, some of the things sold on Amazon or eBay or Craigslist. Jeff Bezos is being sued by a mom whose daughter bought cyanide on Amazon and killed herself with it, tragically. I don't think you should take cyanide. However, I also don't think Jeff Bezos should be hauled into court and thrown into prison because someone on the website did this. It's a very slippery slope. The other thing I really want to say, I'm rambling here, but I want to really make this point. This case is political. And that's why we have all the fake news around it, all that stuff. The judge herself at sentencing said, we know that you created this site for philosophical reasons, and we're not sure it's a philosophy you've left behind. She said basically that Ross is in prison serving life for his philosophy, which happens to be a libertarian philosophy of free markets, free choice, and not that you could buy anything on the site, because it was very much about no force, no creating victims. There was nothing to do with pedophilia. There was nothing, no stolen property, that sort of thing, because those were not voluntary actions. But
that's left for the government. They're the ones who are engaged in all that stuff. So
right, but as many libertarians feel, the drug war, the drugs are a choice. Now that may be misguided. That might have been a reckless thing. I would not necessarily argue with that. However, it was well intentioned. It was about privacy, Bitcoin, and not having the government involved. And I think when you make a use case for a new currency that the government doesn't control, you're going to be poking the bear in a big way. And I really think that's what it's about. Because the biggest drug seller on Silk Road got 10 years. My son got double life plus 40. It's it's definitely political. They want him shut up. They don't want him to be a symbol. They also hate the philosophy of freedom and free markets.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are, and there's definitely a lot to chew on that I could have. I have such bad ADD that I could go down like 100 rabbit holes with all that stuff. We talked about Bill Benny, which he was the basically the non-political head of the NSA who was helping write all this software. And he tried going through the appropriate roles to be a whistleblower because, I hear people say like, oh, Julian Assange, he should bad with him. He should have gone through proper, or I guess Snowden should have gone through the proper protocols. Well, a guy like Bill Benny did go through the proper protocols. And next thing you know is he gets, as he's taking his shower, he gets, the door kicked in and, taken off by men with SWAT team and all this other stuff for blowing the whistle because he created a system where he could target terrorists. But the problem is his system only cost $1 million. And that was the problem, is they needed this to cost like $5 billion, so that way they could give all their friends a cut of the action. So, this is, and when it comes to conservatives, one big problem I have, and most people label me as conservative, even though I'm libertarian, is, one big problem with the NSA is that a lot of people think it's like, oh, that's there to help, protect us against the bad guys, help protect us against the terrorists. When, when probably one of the greatest mathematicians in our country, William Benny, is on record saying, it's there to add more haystacks to the pile, so that way you can never find the needle. And what it's mainly used for is, corporate espionage or blackmailing people, all this other nefarious things, stealing different trade secrets. It's not actually there to protect you. And so I say a lot of people are thinking, America, and this is going to keep me safe. We need to have the NSA. Well, how do you like me now when the NSA is out there, wiretapping the president? And they were, I remember mocking him in, December of 2016, saying, oh, it's ludicrous. We didn't wiretap him. Well, maybe they're right. They didn't wiretap him. Maybe they, just had a dragnet surveillance on the entire tower. Right. And
exactly.
So it's just an issue of semantics. And
they're big on semantics.
And that's
the other thing that's important about the NSA and to know about this case is that Bitcoin, I believe it's about Bitcoin and the money, but the NSA was tracking. It came out just this past March through Snowden's revelations, and The Intercept published it, that Bitcoin users were being tracked by the NSA a few months before Ross was arrested. Hello, I think if they're American citizens, this is illegal. And I thought they were supposed to be tracking terrorists to protect us. But anyway, they were very concerned with Bitcoin users, who's using this Bitcoin. And that's what they were doing. So I think that also indicates that that was what it was really about. That was where they were putting their the government power behind it, is let's stop this currency. Well, it didn't work, obviously. And, we'll see what happens. But yeah, it wasn't about drugs. If they wanted to stop drugs, I think they could have figured it out, since we had a perfect model with alcohol prohibition, how you stop the violence and the problems with drugs. Drugs serve the government's purposes the illegal drugs very well. So
then you get into then you get into private prisons, and there's so many rabbit holes with everything we just touched.
Which, by the way, donate to Chuck Schumer. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, when I was in college, I had a professor, and I went to liberal arts school, so it's weird that this was a prohibition they put on me. But they ended up saying that you can give a speech in anything you want to give it on, except for marijuana. And it was a public speaking class. So being the rebel that I was, decided, okay, well, I'll give a speech on hemp, and ended up getting a 0 on the speech for giving it. But I got a standing ovation. Everyone's like, oh man, I thought this was going to be some BS speech, but I read different books on it and was very well versed on this subject. And it's sort of crazy when you really go down the rabbit hole of how drugs became illegal to begin with, that what really had happened, I guess the short Cliff Note version is you had hemp, which was which Donald Trump actually just legalized, or the federal government just legalized growing hemp just a few weeks ago. And people should be cheering about that, but they don't want to give him any credit on anything. And
I don't know what this guy can do to make, get a little credit. It's true.
And so with the drug war, or I guess, at one point, marijuana was legal while alcohol was illegal, and it was not even a big issue or a big deal. And so it became a big deal when there was, I believe the machine was called the Hemp Decorator. It was basically the equivalent of the cotton gin, but for hemp. And what had happened is hemp, you could grow 4 times more per acre. It was much, much stronger than cotton. It had uses where, the first Model T was made out of hemp. There's a picture of Henry Ford or video hitting him with an axe and bouncing off the car. It ran off of hemp seed oil. So all these foreign wars could be stopped. And a lot of the early ships and stuff, they were, had hemp was a major component of that. It was also a component of the War of 1812, although War of 1812 also had to do with the first central bank of America charters being revoked. And that's not really in our history book, because the British owned basically the first version of the Federal Reserve, and then they came and burned down the White House when we took that away. There's all these different rabbit holes that we could go down in this subject, but with getting back to the drug issue, is what they found was that the head of the FBI, and this is from stuff I read like 15 years ago, so it's not like I looked it up yesterday. So you had the head of the FBI at the time, or created the Bureau of Narcotics. Well, I believe his name was Henry J. Anslinger, and Henry J. Anslinger's cousin was was the guy at DuPont, and DuPont had 75% of their investments into all these new cotton manufacturing, and hemp being legalized, or this new hemp gin would have basically put DuPont out of business. So it was a marriage between DuPont and basically the federal government to then get rid of marijuana. What's funny, then we talked about pedophilia earlier before. I believe it was one of the DuPont heirs who then was had the whole wrestling school where he was doing stuff with little kids. But I'm sure he probably got nowhere near the amount of trouble that Ross is getting in. And so it's just crazy when you look at like the history.
Well, one other point there where you're making, and let me interrupt you real quick. It's the same thing now. The top 5 lobbyists for keeping marijuana illegal are the pharmaceutical companies, the private prisons, the prison guard unions, the police unions, and the alcohol and beer companies. All stand to profit. It's the same thing as what you're talking about with hemp. And, hello, except in this case, it's the human beings are the inventory in a lot of these cases. And so, same thing.
And most people aren't even aware that there's private prisons where they have quotas, where if they're not at 95% occupancy, then the rate that they're reimbursed is greatly reduced or something. I mean, I'm not an expert in all this and this other.
No, they threaten to close them, and they say to the town, "Hey, we better fill some cells, or we're going to have to close, and you'll lose your jobs." Meanwhile, Chuck Schumer receives funds from private prisons. $100,000 was one headline. $100,000. Campaign donations. And at the same time, out of the other side of his mouth, he's saying, "Oh, let's legalize marijuana so he can court the millennial vote." and someone said, "Well, what about the people you're putting in prison?" He goes, "Well, that's another issue. That's the Justice Department." Oh, really? There's people right now. Ross has a friend in prison serving life for marijuana. The federal prison happens to be in Colorado, where it's legal. This is wrong. It's a totally nonviolent person. 13 years he's already served. And he's not the only one.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, we've got to, arrest you on marijuana charges because it's, dangerous. But the only thing dangerous about it is there's people that should not be smoking marijuana but those same people would out there be screwing up their life doing something else or buying some synthetic version of it, which would be.
Or maybe a lot of people shouldn't be over drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
And driving with it. But is it the government's job? Well, they tried to stop it. It was a disaster. That is not the way to legislate morality. It's not cigarettes. Hello, kill people. And it's very schizophrenic, the whole thing. But and then the question is it in our Constitution? Where is this authority coming from at the federal level? I mean, if a state wants to do it, okay, that's federalism. But at the federal level, I've never seen anything about drugs in the Constitution. And at least with alcohol, they passed an amendment to.
And then another amendment to get rid of it.
And then another amendment to make it. They didn't bother. Why go to the trouble with drugs? We'll just give ourselves the authority. Well, if they can do it with drugs, they can do it with anything they want. Once again.
Yeah, and then you get back to maybe former presidents like the Kennedys. I mean, they made their money off bootlegging liquor, and then are the Kennedys should they be locked up for the rest of the rest of their life? And you've got like Ted Kennedy can go kill women while drunk driving, and then get to be having an esteemed career in the Senate for the rest of his days. But it's just I guess getting back to New York, didn't recently you had trying to think of the guy's name, Cuomo over there.
Governor.
I believe he recently let out, to basically as a diss at Donald Trump, to let out some illegal aliens who were selling drugs and who I think some of them had violent assault records or actually tried murdering people, and they got off basically as a big, FU to Donald Trump. Whereas, Ross was never, I mean, the whole hitman thing that's been.
No, all his charges are nonviolent, no violence whatsoever.
And believe me, if they had any shred of evidence that Ross was behind,
totally.
he would have been indicted 7 ways to Sunday.
They love piling on stuff. And the other thing is this kingpin charge that it was given last minute as a threat. He was not initially charged with being a kingpin, as if he's El Chapo.
Yeah, Pablo.
They were pressuring him to plead guilty, and he didn't want to plead guilty to the things they were saying. So they said, we're going to put on the kingpin charge. And they did. And, this is how our prosecutors and our justice system work. Not that they think he's a kingpin. They know he's not. They know he's a geek. He's a website guy. Wasn't like he was. Not too many kingpins believe in voluntary interaction, not using force, giving people freedom of choice. That's not your typical kingpin. It's totally hyperbolic. And again, now used in the media. And so suddenly Ross is equivalent to Pablo Escobar. And it's absurd.
No, I couldn't agree more. And just yesterday, I happened to stumble across, you probably know him, James Babb,
I
activist out
know
of
him very well.
Philadelphia. And
Mm-hmm.
he was also at the Nexus Earth Conference. But he posted just yesterday on his Facebook, posted the a Forbes article from April 29th, 2013, where it's called Collected Quotations of the Dread Pirate Roberts, founder
Oh,
of the underground drug site Silk Road and radical libertarian. So I went through this last night. And basically, I highlighted just a ton of it, but you go through here and there's just so many quotes where it outlines the fact that he's not this, violent guy. And he's talking about, money and saying, well, money, is one motivating factor for me. But if it wasn't, I wouldn't impose a commission on trades or require vendors to use Silk Road payment processor. But money motivates me for two reasons. For one, I have basic human needs that allows me to meet so that I can devote my time, blah, 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 blah. And basically says, hey, I get, maybe I eat a little bit nicer food every now and then. But the other part goes on to say money is powerful and it's going to take power to affect the kind of changes I want to see. Money allows us to expand our infrastructure and manpower to accommodate the growing demands of our market and to pursue paths that will complement and strengthen what's already been created here. And with all that being said, my primary motivation is not personal wealth, but making a difference. And as corny as it sounds, I just want to look back in my life and know that I did something worthwhile to help people. It's fulfilling to me. If you don't know this joy, you may hear my words as insincere and as a way to manipulate, but I know they are true and resonate with some of you. And so there's just so much here where, and then he, goes on to say how, there's basically a lot of people there in the Silk Road who are helping make this a reality, because he wasn't a coder. He was more of the philosophical ideals of how this works. And then I know it also goes on to say in another one of these where it goes on to say, that the, here at Silk Road, we recognize the smallest minority, which is you. And that's something that Ernie talks about all the time, Ernest Hancock of freedomsphoenix.com, where people try to say, hey, you're not for minority rights. He's like, well, I'm for the smallest minority. He's like, me. He's like,
yeah.
there's no one out there smaller than me. And when it comes to Ross and trying to protect the individual, that was really what the basis of this country was founded on, was to protect the individual from the government. And it's completely warped now where, I know there's certain quotes out there: when the government fears the people, you have, liberty, and when the people fear the government, you have tyranny. I think it was Thomas Jefferson. But yeah, there's just so many things that we, different dovetails that we can go on, and just and I think that with, quote unquote traditional Republicans, that they just get lost in so many of these different freedom issues. And I like to call them finos, freedom in name only, where they want to, talk about how free they are until, oh, you're having too much freedom, or we don't agree with that freedom. And I think people should do whatever they want to do, as long as they're not hurting somebody else, and as long as it's not forcing it on me. And we would have a much better society where, even if, let's get into some of the other hard charges that are against your son. They're trying to say that, I think, what's the allegation that, 6 people died as a result of overdosing on.
Well, that was that was brought up at sentencing as an ambush by the prosecutors. It was never charged. And we brought in a pathologist who said it was completely unable to be proven, unfounded, et cetera. And yet the judge allowed it. And, I felt like these grieving parents were manipulated by the prosecution. Of course, that's why you don't have family members on a jury when the defendant is their family member. You don't do that, but she allowed it. And, look, the government was running the site for during the time that at least 2 of those people died, according to the record. Is the government also guilty for keeping it open? We don't even know if Ross was running the site then. He says he got out, and there's a lot of indication that he did. And in Railroaded, everything in Railroaded is from the public record. Now, there is a lot that we don't know because it's sealed, undisclosed, and encrypted. I don't know why the government insists on keeping everything secret if they have nothing to hide, and it should be transparent, but they are. But even just what's public, And there's almost 400 footnotes in there. It's backed up. And so we don't even know exactly who was DPR. It's well established, including Curtis Green, who you referenced earlier. He goes, oh yeah, there were lots of DPRs. I was DPR for a while. He said this. You know, there were 2 corrupt agents who had complete run of the site. They are now in prison because they stole a lot of money.
And they tried to frame Curtis Green to make everyone think
they
that
set
Curtis
up
stole
this
the
whole
money.
murder for hire. It's the whole murder for hire indictment in Maryland, which, by the way, has been, well, the whole indictment included that. It's been dismissed with prejudice, so that's gone. You know, everything that was ever alleged violent against Ross is gone. It never either happened or they've dropped it. But they based it on evidence from a corrupt DEA agent who's now in prison himself. We're supposed to believe this? And, you know, yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of questions, but yes, the prosecution brought in these parents. You know, one son was a heroin addict, tragically. You know, it's like there's no proof. It was totally like a kangaroo court. It wasn't court because it wasn't trial, it was sentencing. But it added this, even the appellate judge said it put a thumb on the scale of justice by bringing in this emotion that, you know, it's not proven, it's not rational, it's just manipulation by the prosecution. And of course, the media picked up on it and the media loved it, and they're still bringing it up. You know, but it's like, do we care about proof? Do we care about juries? Do we care about a rule of law or not? Or we leave it up to prosecutors and the media to decide who's guilty? Well, if we do, we're all really in danger, because whoever is running this can pinpoint anybody, and they do. And then you could be put in a prison. And this, you know, every totalitarian state, you can go back in history and currently, that's what they do. Do we want this here? Do we want our country hijacked by these people or not? Because we're at a tipping point, like I said.
Absolutely. And I guess getting back to the, you know, the allegation that 6 people died as a result of drug overdoses. I mean, that's in how it parallels with conservatives is that's like saying, okay, well, guns are legal. You know, we have the Second Amendment, but look at, you know, there's a few people that, you know, use guns in bad ways. So, you know, as a result, we should just get rid of all the guns because, you know, if we could just save one life, whereas they don't ever get into, we'll look at the amount of people that were maybe saved because of having a gun. You never hear the media talk about, hey, you know, this one person who had a good guy who had a gun, you know, killed someone at a mall who's going to shoot up the entire mall. You don't hear about that person ever. But just like, I think this parallels into Ross, is where I'm going with this is, well, yeah, maybe let's just even assume, okay, what if 6 people did die because of overdoses? That's assuming that they wouldn't have found drugs had the Silk Road not been there. That's also assuming that maybe there's people whose lives were saved because there was a Silk Road. Maybe there was people who didn't get involved into a violent interaction with maybe a corrupt drug dealer because there was a Silk Road, or maybe there was a actual people who you know. And I believe, I've never been on the dark web, never been on Tor, Onion browsers, any of that stuff. Never been on the Silk Road, but from my understanding of it is that it had an eBay like rating system where, you know, hey, this guy's got 5 stars and he's, you know, we can trust him. He's not going to taint his drugs with, you know, lace it with some other some other, you know, more powerful substance. And so there's people who
a review system,
so there's people who are getting maybe they're getting their drugs on the street and they don't know, you know, the purity of it or the quantity or the, you know, they don't know what's actually in it. Whereas if you all of a sudden were, hey, we're selling these drugs that are laced and maybe that person then would get, you know, a 1-star rating and bad reviews and nobody would buy it. So the free market actually creates a system where it probably makes this actually safer than, you know, these interactions, or maybe now since they're being mailed to your house, you don't have to get in the car, and getting in your car is one of the most dangerous things you could do driving. So maybe the argument can be made that more people's lives were actually saved by having the Silk Road. And then not to get mentioned,
people have made that argument. And
also,
also,
that was the first. Damn it,
well, there is a harm reduction argument, but also this pathologist who's 30 years experience, a medical pathologist who analyzed the autopsy reports of these people. One of them had just gotten out of the hospital. One of them had pneumonia. They had, I mean, there was nothing to determine that this was even true. And I'm not saying it absolutely couldn't have happened with the quantity of drugs that were exchanged, mostly marijuana, by the way. It was 75% marijuana, user amounts of marijuana. You'd never know that from the media or the prosecutors. But, and yes, some people chose to exchange dangerous drugs. I'm not for it. I wish that had never happened. I feel for any parent. So don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we have to preserve objectivity and rational behavior in a courtroom and sentencing. You can't just go accusing people of things and holding them responsible without proof, without some kind of coherent case. Just saying it and appealing to emotion, that's very dangerous. And that's what happened. That's what this judge allowed.
And I believe there's also been studies done that say, the average American commits, I don't know what it is, like three felonies a day.
Right.
And so, and so if you want to get somebody bad enough, and then I know the NSA uses all sorts of tools like parallel construction where they can, they'll go back through somebody's record and, illegally, and then.
They used a lot of parallel construction in Ross's case. They claimed one thing, and then which is, a story to cover up the fact that the NSA actually was involved. They did it. It was obvious.
And how they say they caught him that there was like a forum on like bitcointalk.com or something like that where he had said, hey, here's my email address, and supposedly this one government agent found it, and that was like
by a Google search. For 2 years everyone had been looking, but he just decided to Google it. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it reminds me of like 9/11 when they find like the passports, like the same day. Like,
it's like,
I guess that's a whole nother.
Okay, should have thought of that Google search.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They work for the government, so don't give them too much credit.
Yeah, really. But no, there's so many things. And by the way, that pathology report is available on our website if anyone wants to look at it. It's long and involved and detailed, and saying no, this. And the judge just threw that out. She just dismissed it. She dismissed 100 letters that are on our website that are written by people who actually know Ross and who he is as a person. Because when you were talking earlier about the quotes from Silk Road Manifesto, which actually Chuck Schumer is sounding a lot like that now. He's like, oh, well, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. I'm like, oh, Chuck, have you been reading the Silk Road Manifesto? But in any case, that I don't know. I don't know for sure, but I can tell you that is Ross's philosophy, that he cares about the individual. He's always been, and these letters show, even as a young person, a compassionate person, an idealistic one who wants to help people. And even in the prison, the guards would come up to me often, such a good guy. He doesn't belong in here. He needs, and his counselor, his caseworker, his legal department, they're like, they loved Ross because of who he is, and inmates. And this was a violent place with violent gangs, and Ross was liked. He was, he'd help people, he tutored, he led classes. He said to me once, here as a mom, I've been, I worked all his life to have a good peer group and good influences. And now he's in a maximum security prison with violent gang leaders and things like that. But he said, Mom, gang leaders are people too. And, they're human beings. And that's how Ross is. He treats people with respect and is always willing to help, help them write letters or, just be a good example and, peaceful. And in fact, recently he refused to participate in an assault on another inmate that he was being pressured to do, and put himself in protective custody, which meant being in essentially a metal box for 3.5 months. He's now out, thank God, but with no books. No, he had a Bible. He was able to read the Bible. And that was all was allowed. I think one time they brought a book around, but in any case, in a metal box 24/7 for 3.5 months, rather than assault another person who he didn't know. He didn't want, it wasn't like self-defense. He didn't have any reason. And this is who my son is. And the taxpayer needs to pay basically $2 million per inmate. So $2 million for his life in a maximum security prison, a life sentence for someone that has no violence, has never physically or in any way directly harmed anyone. He's, you know, not to give him a second chance for something that he did, created when he was 26 years old and very excited about freedom and liberty and privacy and cryptocurrency and all of that stuff.
And he had several
Is
degrees too.
wrong.
So he was had several degrees too. So it's not like he got out when he was 22 years
Masters.
old. So
No.
so how old was he when he got out of college, or what?
Well, let's
What?
see. He would have been 24 when he got his master's. So he
Okay.
graduated, yeah, and then he got his master's. He's really a scientist, and that's the other thing. Lots of computer programmers said he didn't have computer programming training. He couldn't have done that, and I don't think he did. You know, it's like he couldn't have created and run this thing. He had, like you said, I believe he had the concept he wanted, you know, but to think that one kid sitting in a cafe on his laptop ran a multi-million-dollar worldwide empire is absurd. But it's pretty well established. There were many people doing it, but they got their trophy. They got their trophy. And this is wrong. Our system's being hijacked. Our freedoms are being hijacked, and we need to pay attention. And that's what the government does too, is they cover up, you know, well, it's drugs and well, a murder for hire and all this stuff. So don't care about this case that is such an outrage. Don't care about it because he's not worth caring about. And hey, you know what? As David Knight said so eloquently, he said, first they came for Ross, then they're going to come for you. And you basically said the same thing. It's like, step back and let's see what's really going on. And let's see who's really dangerous here.
And let's keep David Knight in our thoughts and prayers too, because he did have
a
massive heart attack just a few days ago.
Yeah, I've been praying for him and all the best to him. Oh my gosh, yes. We can't lose him. He's wonderful. Great person.
I mean, and David's, you know, type of guy where, you know, pretty much, you know, because I've been, you know, I think I discovered Alex Jones probably in like 2010, 2011. And the first time I was ever on Ernie's show, he's like, how the hell do you know everything? Know all this stuff? And I'm like, well, you know, I was doing Ironman triathlons. I have to bike 100 miles every Saturday, and I'll just pop, you know, some Alex Jones in my ear. And I got to the point where I got to the point where, you know, after the election of Trump, I felt like it turned really into the Donald Trump show. And I, you know, there was a lot, and believe me, there's probably very few people out there that put themselves out there more than me in terms of trying to get Trump elected and pissing people off from every direction. You know, I just want to give some people background on this, that, you know, I was a guy that said I would never vote. I was hardcore, you know, Ron Paul guy. I've got, you know, the same sign he's got on his desk, you know, behind me. You know, I ran a marathon carrying a Ron Paul banner, you know, doing everything I could. I mean, someone couldn't even get next to me without hearing about Ron Paul for years and years and years. And then I saw him get, you know, another good word is railroaded. You know, he got railroaded in the, you know, in the lead up to the election, where they, you know, had rules that got changed and all sorts of, I mean, that's a whole nother, you know, story with all that. And then I wanted, you know, his son Rand, and I was pushing for him. And then I saw, you know, by the time, you know, January 2016 rolled around, I realized, you know, he doesn't have a shot in hell, just because, you know, him and Ted Cruz were sort of vying for the same spot. And by him attacking Donald Trump, it really, it was a bad tactical move on Rand Paul's part. And then I saw Donald Trump as this guy who, you know, there's a lot of things I don't like about him, you know, and I lost a lot of followers for, you know, complaining about him being in Syria. And now that, you know, now he's pulling out of Syria. Well, the only reason that stuff happens is because people like me are willing to complain about it. But I've been attacked so much by the hardcore Trump people who, you know, I've reached millions of people to try to get him elected. There is evidence to suggest I was the first person to have fake news go viral. And so believe me, I'm not, and I've got, you know, a hat that I bought before the election signed by Donald Trump. I mean, so does that look like somebody
Nice.
who's, you know, my daughter was born the first day Trump was in office, one of my daughters, and I wore a Trump shirt there. So, I mean, so the people that come out here and say that, you know, I'm against him, but at the same, so it's just sort of maddening where, you know, I was the libertarian advisor, but trying to get libertarians to vote for Trump, because I figured, you know, the guy's not a globalist, you know, which, you know, is saying something. He's not part of the Bilderberg group. He's not part of the Council on Foreign Relations. You know, he said some good stuff about the Federal Reserve at the time. You know, he could pull out of the TPP. There was good things that he was doing, but I don't agree. But the one thing that really got to me when he got in there was that by taking credit for all the economic success, I knew that was going to be his absolute downfall, and because I knew that they were going to set him up and set him up in this trap. And I made a presentation that I gave the Ernie's people at one of his parties called "The Trump Effect" and why good news is bad news. And the entire premise was, listen, Trump's going to do some good things for the economy. It's going to make the stock market go up, but then that's going to give the Federal Reserve no excuse to not raise rates, and that's going to then pop the bubble. And that's exactly what we've seen happen.
Right.
So it pains me to see him stepping in to this absolute trap. And so we have and one thing that Ross talked about pretty extensively was the Federal Reserve System. And that's really what got me down this entire rabbit hole was the Federal Reserve System. I was on the class that won the national competition on the Federal Reserve against Harvard and Yale. But I wasn't, just for the record, I wasn't actually in the competition because I was on the water polo team and I thought there was a bunch of nerds and I didn't feel like wasting my weekends taking a bus to New York City every weekend. So I was in the small class that won the national competition. And one day, this guy that looks like Rob Zombie, the rock singer, tells me that the Federal Reserve is private. I'm like, you're full of crap. I've got this stockbroker's license. I was on the class that won the national competition. You look like a weirdo with your hair down to here. And it turns out, and then my wife happened to give me the book Creature from Jekyll Island, which brought me down this
It's a
whole
good
rabbit
book.
hole.
Oh yeah. Ross gave me that book.
Oh, really? So, okay.
Yes.
And I've given that book to probably 20 different people. I've got a signed copy somewhere floating around here. And actually, before I went to go, and I had to end up resigning from my highly lucrative career that I had built up for speaking at Anarchapulco last year. And as I'm backstage about to present, I see G. Edward Griffin back there. Like, oh man, like this is the whole reason.
He was he was in Aspen too.
And he was, that's somebody who I left off, one of my greatest heroes, and I didn't even forgot to mention him.
Well, you did very well, actually. Well, just a couple of things about what we touched on, a lot of things. Say what you will about Alex Jones. He saw the implications of Ross's case very early, interviewed me, and Paul Joseph Watson, and he actually did a show on it as well, and how it's a danger to the internet to be attacking website hosts, and how it's going to put a chill on the internet because they can be held criminally liable for what's on their site, even if they, are promoting it, not promoting it, have nothing to do with it. And so since then, David Knight, who has called for, he's been very supportive. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and very, very smart and well-spoken and eloquent. And he called for commutation of Ross's sentence publicly. He has been super supportive on social media to us. And yes, our prayers for him and his family right now. And also, I want to just mention, as far as libertarians, the Libertarian Party officially, as a party, has called for clemency for Ross. So, a lot of people do understand that this is not what the line from the prosecutors and the government and the mainstream media is. They're very shallow. The mainstream media is happy to take the best clickbait or whatever. I think they're fed by the government because they want access, and there's a lot of control there. There's a lot of cooperation.
Operation Mockingbird, where it came out that the CIA actually controlled all the major newsrooms. Right. And, if you think that actually
more about it. Yeah, right. It's just obvious, but I think, so please don't believe everything you read about Ross or his case. And there's a lot of very smart people. We have a support page on our website, very smart people and very eminent people who are saying, no, this is wrong and this has larger implications than just, a kingpin drug dealer who, no, that's not what this case is.
Basically, he created a website that allowed anybody to basically an anonymous version of Craigslist, which, to some extent, Craigslist could be anonymous anyways if people are transacting with cash, which would be harder to actually, which is actually the biggest financing of terrorism is done through the U.S. dollar. So if people want to talk about, apples to apples, and then you look into just all the criminality that's gone on with, like Hillary Clinton, all the stuff she's done and is able to get away with, which, right in the run up to the election, I made a list. It was going to be a top 10 list. And then I had to change it through like an A through Z. And then I couldn't even finish it A through Z and had to almost go back through the alphabet again. And one point that you were bringing up was that, you've got all these different big institutions that are trying to regulate the internet. Well, I mean, I think it was, a few weeks ago, it came out that somebody was sold into slavery in like Libya or something over Facebook. I mean,
Right.
if that's the case, Mark Zuckerberg, I think that's a much more violent act than anything your son did. Or look, I'm sure there's people who talk about drug deals through Facebook Messenger or through Facebook. I remember back
People
in the
buy
day.
drugs on Craigslist. They buy drugs on Facebook, eBay. I've been told this. I don't buy drugs, okay, but I've been told this, and many other things. People have been murdered on Craigslist. They have done murders on Facebook Live. There's been jihadi activity promoted on Facebook. I mean, if you want to start getting into that, it's the internet.
And they are actually now curators, because you had Tim Cook of Apple saying, we aren't censoring Alex Jones, we're curating Alex Jones. And so
That's
now that they're
so
a curator,
outrageous.
they've sort of lost their public commons, because they used to say, hey, we're this big public commons. And I was on Facebook in 2004.
Right.
My school just happened to be one of the first schools in the world on Facebook, and I just happened to get on it right away. Kind of funny story how that ended up being. But anyways, now that they are curating content, I mean, they now could be liable as publishers. And if they want to be held to the same standard as Ross, who was not, a curator, the only thing he was doing is saying, hey, we're not going to allow, maybe that's why he's in trouble with the government, because he's not allowing pedophiles or not allowing some of this other nefarious
it was more restrictive than some of these sites, actually. And Curtis Green even said they would spend hours every day going through and kicking off people who were victimizing other people. So it's the intention was good. Let's just put it that way. The intention was good. I'm not saying it always resulted in good, but the intention was good. It's not like,
Yeah, I mean, people can lie about, oh, hey, they've got weapons of mass destruction. Now we're going to kill, millions of people. Or we can lie about, the Vietnam War with Gulf of Tonkin, and saying that, which has come out through the NSA, was made up. And it's historical record that it never even happened. And look at all, and then that's just chalked up as like a whoopsies, bad intel or heat of the moment, type decisions, versus, what your son has alleged to have done. And it looks very much like, your son created the site, but then early on found out that he was way in over his head, had to bring in other technical experts. One thing I didn't know until...
Let me just say real quick, as you said, I'm going to grab things you're saying so I can just quickly... Playpen, which trafficked in children, okay? The government dropped their case against Playpen. Now, they claimed it was the people behind it, which to me is extremely evil. They and was not allowed on Silk Road at all. They claimed that it was because they didn't want to reveal their investigative techniques, but I really question, were there some big high-level people involved in Playpen that maybe we were able to influence? I don't know. I just wonder. Just a thought. But in any case, they dropped it. And they also kept it open and allowed trafficking of children after they had already found it and could have stopped it. So please, don't give me your moral high ground on one hand, and then basically not even prosecute people who were using children.
Or Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, he recently, I think, had his cases dropped again, or got hit with a slap on the wrist. Because when you're palling around with Bill Clinton, on the Lolita Express, and all the other people that were palling around with him, including, I think the Queen's son, Prince Andrew, and all these high-level people. Okay, well, we're not touching that because, we've got all these, big-time people with this. And so eventually it gets to the point where these institutions just exist to protect the institution, no matter how noble or good. And I think even Ross sort of hints at that in some of the writings, where, basically saying that he hopes Silk Road doesn't turn evil, but you shouldn't trust anybody, and you shouldn't even trust him, because, you should, I guess always do your own, as the financial advisor, always do your own research. But it's just absolutely crazy. But when I guess getting into, his case, it seemed like you had, and I'm just trying to paraphrase here, and I hope you can pick up some of the missing spots, is you had this one prosecutor who was trying to, basically closed in on another person. The other person was, it seemed like it was Mark Karpelis from was actually part of Mount Gox exchange, which I didn't even realize that there was which he actually had more of a financial incentive for the Silk Road, I guess, than Ross, because he had the largest Bitcoin exchange, and it seemed like he had the technical know-how. Then there's other government agents and agencies and alphabet soups who they were, closing in on other people, or who they used everybody was stepping on everybody else's toes, and everybody wanted credit for getting this, but they and it sounded like it was either, whether it was Mark Karpelès or somebody else, basically gave Ross up to help get out of their own legal woes, and then Ross all of a sudden then had to take the blame for everything. But meanwhile, you had two of the agents that were working this case. They actually developed access to the Silk Road website. I mean, so much to the fact that even when Ross was in a cage in jail, people were sending messages out as DPR when he was in solitary confinement with no actual access to a computer. But these two agents were then, actually stealing Bitcoin, and then then they didn't want to get caught, so then they blamed it on another Silk Road administrator, Curtis Green, and then they tried saying that DPR was putting a hit out on Curtis, then should have probably Curtis roll on Ross or somebody else. And so it was this huge, I mean, you want to talk about the criminal masterminds, it was the two government agents were the biggest masterminds in this, trying to cover their tracks and doing things to frame other people. And if they had the root access in there, they could have, changed passwords and reset the passwords and then acted like they were DPR, and that was proven. And then the tactics they used to catch him, where they had this illegal NSA dragnet surveillance. And then earlier you'd got into, there was no amendment to make to make drugs illegal. And I believe what they did was, for that, is it was sort of like the machine guns, where they had a machine gun stamp act, but in order to have the machine gun, in order to have the stamp, you had to have the machine gun. But if you had the machine gun, you're already committing the crime. And so they did the same thing with marijuana, where technically marijuana is not illegal. You have to have the stamp, but in order to have the stamp, you have to have the marijuana. So you've already committed the crime before
so clever.
Before you've even had it. And this was and this was something I read like 15, 16, actually it's already 2019, so it's probably 16, 17 years ago, reading this stuff. So I don't have it all at the top of my head right now, but just as I hope you can fill in some of the corruption cases involved.
Well, let me kind of give a quick synopsis of everything, what you said. The initial investigator was actually a DHS agent. He was honing in, well, he was on the site for 2 years and thousands of hours undercover. So he was in there. He even testified at trial. I heard him with my own ears that he thought there were many DPRs. Most people do. But that he was honing in on a main one, and he thought it was Mark Karpelès. And I want to be clear, I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I have no proof it was Mark Karpelès. I don't know. But it's part of the public record, and that's why it's in Railroaded. I'm not trying to harm Mark Karpelès or anyone. But I do think that it's part of the story, because it was part of the public record, and that's what we were conveying. So what happened was, and apparently this is common, he was out of Chicago. Maryland, where the corrupt agents were, was competing for it, because everybody wanted the trophy. Chuck Schumer made it a trophy, and everybody wanted it. And then New York stepped in ultimately, and New York's the big bully on the block, and they pretty much get what they want. There were very questionable agents involved in Maryland, and they were trying to undermine the investigation. And it came out in trial that by this DHS agent, that Mark Karpelès' lawyers met with Maryland, where the corruption was, and offered them a name in exchange for them backing off of their client. I don't know what actually transpired. I don't know what was exchanged. I don't know if anything was paid. I have no idea. But it did come out in trial that they offered a name. And then shortly after Ross was arrested, I have to assume it was Ross's name. But in any case, So if you start reading Railroaded or listening to it, there's a accompanying audio video part. It's like, wow, this is what goes on in an investigation. There's so much corruption. It's not just the two guys who are in prison now, which are big. There's others things, including that an agent, it looks like another agent, was threatening to kidnap me and my daughter to use as blackmail to Ross to turn over a key he thinks Ross has that he doesn't have. I mean, that's in there. I mean, it's like, it's hard to believe even that this is happening. So, yeah, it's quite the interesting read. So I encourage everyone to. It's entertaining, even though it sounds boring. Oh, it's based on the public record. Big yawn. No, actually, it's pretty, as you said, pretty compelling. So
Sort of
that's
like the
what.
creature from Jekyll Island when
Oh my
I'm like,
gosh,
oh,
Ross is
great, you know,
calling
an
me.
800-page book
Ross
in
is
the Federal
calling me
Reserve.
right now. Ross is calling me.
Really?
Can we pause this? A
Yeah.
lot of good stuff. But anyway, go ahead.
Was there anything that you could say on air that you talked with, or any messages that Ross wanted to get?
No, we're just working out. He's in Oklahoma on his way there, and we're working out different stuff for the lawyers and that we have and that kind of thing. It's not, yeah.
And so, just so the audience knows, he was in federal pen in up in was it Florence, Denver, and then or the
No,
Colorado
Florence,
area.
Colorado, where he was on the same compound as a supermax, but not in the supermax, but in a maximum security prison, the next step down from the supermax, where the Bureau of Prisons puts its most violent people and gangs. And here they do this with people, anyone who's a life sentence, nonviolent people. He had a whole, in fact, there's a picture on our website of him with a group of nonviolent drug offenders serving life, sorry, that are in this prison. And of course, this puts them in danger. And also you realize it's a kind of a criminal training ground. Not that Ross is a criminal. That's one of the reasons I have moved to be near him and visit him regularly, is I want him to have that lifeline to the normal world so it doesn't become his world. But a lot of people, to survive, have to kind of become, yeah, there you go, become criminals, or at least tougher, much tougher. And these guys, are all nonviolent. And they're all drug offenders in a state where, like the guy I was telling you about that was in there for marijuana, in the state where marijuana is legal, he's serving a life sentence. Life. I mean, when I was growing up, life sentences were reserved for the very few mass murdering maniacs who really put people in danger. You didn't, and up until parole was taken away from the federal system, after 30 years of good behavior, which is a long time, 3 decades is a long time, they could be eligible to be released. You know, these are nonviolent people often. I'm not saying they didn't make mistakes or do bad things, but people do change. In fact, they've proven with studies that as people age and mature, they become less likely to commit crimes. They mature. Ross is much more mature now at 34 than he was at 26 when he came up with this idea of an internet free market. He is a different guy. He understands the repercussions of breaking the law. He understands the repercussions on our family and on, he's not, a 26-year-old and a 34-year-old are very different.
I was just about to say
yeah.
that because I'm turning 33 later this week.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I mean, I'm almost the exact same age as Ross. Just, and right before you mentioned that, I was going to say, the 23-year-old version of me versus I mean, granted, I was sort of red pilled into all this stuff back then too. So it's not,
Right. He was too at 23. Right.
but
exactly.
there's different things, and you got some more life experiences, and one thing that Roger Ver has touched on quite a bit in a lot of his presentations, and also shout out to Roger, who he received a letter recently from Ross where basically Ross is pleading that we've tried doing things through the basically going through through the system, and whether we have the best lawyers, the best cases, the best arguments, none of that really matters, because unless we get a presidential pardon from President Trump, that is pretty much our best hope. And so part of the main I guess genesis for this talk today is we want to parallel some of what is going on with Donald Trump with what was going on with Ross, and not saying that we're expecting Trump to come out and say that Ross is the greatest guy ever and he endorses everything he does. I mean, even if he says hey, we think it was really stupid what you did and we don't ever want you doing this again, or whatever admonishment that he wants to give to separate himself from this, I fully would support that, as long as it's there's no reason why we should be caging someone whose main crime was creating a website, who then the website allowed you to do whatever you wanted to do, and people then chose
within limits. Don't forget those limits.
except it was as long as it was non-violent. And
or harming others, like with pedophilia or something. Yeah.
it was a very important distinction. And then when you
Yes.
also get into, the places that are the most free, and this is where the Roger Ver, I guess, link comes in. Roger talks all the time about, you look at countries that have the most economic prosperity and most economic freedom, and those are the countries that have the longest lifespans. They have the least amount of crime, and all these other statistics that go on and on and on. And so from a certain standpoint, yeah, Ross is a bad guy because he created a website that allowed people to buy personal amounts of marijuana for the most part, and then some people use it to buy other harder drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a free market system, we're not the answer for everybody. I mean, if you give people freedom, some people are going to do bad things with freedom. If you want absolute, security, I believe it was Eisenhower who said, if you want to have, 100% security and be fed, basically you're where, and paradoxically, this is where Ross ended up. He ended up in a prison. So if you want 100% security, go to a prison, but they can't even keep the prisoners secure, because you just mentioned someone getting beat up, and then they can't even keep the drugs out of prison either.
No, they're killed. There
Killed.
was a murder. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure this goes on every day. And you'd also touched on how their criminal training grounds. Well, I mean, I think the movie Blow with featured George Young's life with Johnny Depp. That in that movie they go on to say how it was when one of his partners went to jail, it basically became this criminal mastermind of, hey, well, I was doing things this way, and found out once they get out that I can do things these other ways and make it and expand it even more so. And we've got a guy who's down in, I think it's near Tucson, who's in prison for Bitcoin right now, Morpheus, one of Ernie's good friends. And really, it's like, well, it's sort of a bad idea to throw him into jail, because now he's going to red pill everybody on what Bitcoin is. And so he luckily, is getting out, I think in like a year and a half or so.
Kind of what Ross is doing too. A lot of those guys ask him about Bitcoin, and he, and he passes Reason magazine around, and yeah. But anyway, yeah, no, just to go on with what you said, as far as the petition, you don't have to agree with Silk Road, of course, and you don't have to think Ross is a wonderful person to sign this petition. What the petition's really about is this excessive sentencing that's being used as a weapon against many people in this country, that is way, way, way beyond what was done in America up until the drug war. Life sentences have quintupled. There's about 17,000 nonviolent people like Ross serving life. If you add virtual life, which is it's so long a sentence, it's not strictly life, but so long a sentence they're going to die in there, it's over 200,000 people. This wasn't true in America before. I mean, can we just go back to the way it was before the 80s? And in many ways, but that. And so I think that's really important, for people to understand. And if people, the thing is, I also was hoping that someone could have the president understand, because I've been told this over and over again, if he commutes Ross's sentence, I would have to support him, even though I don't now, that there is a huge voting bloc waiting to support him if he commutes Ross's sentence. It will send a signal towards decentralization, pro-Bitcoin, and against excessive sentencing. And we're talking about the Bitcoin people, tech people, the libertarians that would think, oh, okay, this is a real statement here. And I think he could actually gain, I know, because it's going to be, he'll get pushback too, but I think he could actually gain politically by commuting Ross's sentence, Ross, who is a hero to many. And then if he made it easier to deal in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies in this country, because a lot of people are fleeing the United States to do business elsewhere, that would also be really a big boost. So if anyone...
Did you see his new chief of staff is Mick Mulvaney, who I guess headed the Congressional Blockchain Count, something like that. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I heard about him. Yes,
I don't know.
Try to get a hold of him.
I don't know a ton about him, but one idea, and actually I just texted when Ross had called, and I texted one of my friends, and he was saying that right now he's 2 degrees away from the president, and he said we need to get a pardon for Ross, and that
that's
basically
awesome.
He would, if he can get
that's great,
the meeting with the president. He's doing, I don't want to give out a name who he is right now with the recording, but no, he's into some big stuff that Trump would like. And
that's great. I would love to talk to him, because obviously anyone who like that, who has connections, That's what this is about now. We're out of the judicial system, which is, I'm sorry, I've lost my faith in. I really have, especially in New York. But I've lost my faith in it. So we're in the political arena now. And yeah, that'd be
And
great.
all
And by the
ideas.
way, just a quick distinction. A pardon is complete exoneration, nothing on your record. We're not even asking for a pardon. A pardon is usually you're out of prison, you're pardoned. We're asking to commute this egregious, draconian, barbaric sentence that has been given to someone who for no nonviolent charges. So commuting a sentence can be for time served, or it can be for less time, although we certainly would hope for time served. It's plenty. It's sufficient.
I mean,
He will
how
never
many
do
cocaine dealers did Bill Clinton, completely pardon? And I mean, and some of them were big time contributors to him and his
Yeah.
wife, and then that's how they got their sentences either commuted or completely pardoned. I can't remember.
But the ones, if you usually get a pardon if you're not in prison. If you're already in prison, like Alice Johnson, who President Trump did commute her sentence. She had a life sentence for drugs, and he commuted it. He didn't. She's not totally pardoned, so you still remain a felon, and there's a couple of things, but you're not in prison.
So he can't vote. So okay, so
couldn't vote and can't own a firearm in the United States, I guess. But yeah.
But
So
I completely agree with you that
we're
I
really
think
just asking a commutation of a very egregious sentence and a political sentence, and we're not even asking for a pardon.
And I think Trump is going to have his hands full this next election. I predicted my grandpa had to have an intervention with me saying, hey, Tim, you're a smart guy. You're making our family look like idiots. You keep talking about how Trump, you think he's going to win. That's no chance. This is like October. And so I did get an apology from him. But this time I thought that, Trump has a good chance of losing. And it was because of his embrace of the stock market, not going to get in. I mean, I've got videos going back to literally like the day after the election saying, do not do this. Do not embrace this market. They're going to, it's a trap that they're going to set for you. And so this time around, you had a lot of people who, they thought Hillary had a 98% chance of winning. So if you're some kid that's in your mom's basement and you think that, Hillary has a 98% chance of winning, well, maybe you're not going to go out and vote. And so this time, since I think no one's going to take that risk, and there was, and people say, yeah, he won by a landslide. Well, no, he didn't. I mean, there's several states where he won by like 5,000 people or 50,000 people, which, in the grand scheme of things is like, point nothing of a percentage away, where if you just piss off, a very small amount of libertarians who voted for Trump, which a lot of libertarians don't like to admit that they did, and it's sort of on the DL, especially at the crypto conferences, or you go to Anarchapulco and some people come up to me and whisper, oh yeah, I did vote for Trump, but I don't want to let people know that here. And so sort of like this petition, people don't want to, let people know that so if you're willing to get 117,000 people who are willing to put their name out there and saying they want this, I mean, the number has to be, 10 times that. Not to.
My goal is 500,000, and actually Roger Ver called for 1 million. Yeah, and I want to be able to say to the president, look, 500,000 people believe this sentence is egregious. But the other thing, just a point, social media and Silicon Valley will never like Trump no matter what. And then we've made the point, he can do First Step Act. He can push the First Step Act through for criminal justice reform. He can legalize hemp. It doesn't matter. But that's not true of the libertarians and the crypto people, especially because of Ross and a lot of the tech people. I don't think it's true. I think that it's a whole demographic that he could get support from.
And people who don't even normally vote, who would vote.
Right.
For him,
they would, and normally vote. And people said, I've said countless people, well, God, if he commuted Ross's sentence, I have to support him, because Ross, that would be a huge symbolic gesture, and also it'd be the right thing. And it's also many of those people's hero. I mean, as you said in the beginning, Bitcoin probably wouldn't even exist as anything more than a video kind of currency that, nothing.
Yeah, I really wish I would have put money into it back then, because I knew what it was early on. I knew what it was.
Tell me about it.
And the first time I was ever did an interview with it, I said, listen, this is the most speculative thing you could possibly do. It could go to zero. And I thought outside of the anarcho-capitalist libertarian world that the odds of it succeeding would be slim to none. And so in 2011, my wife and I got married, moved across the country. The very next week to Phoenix, I started a business, was completely broke, and saved all my money to buy a house the next year. And then the value of the house went up 1,000% from like my down payment. So
that's good.
I had to then sell the house to then live after the government then shut me down then I was forced to resign to talk at Anarchapulco. And then the state of Arizona then held on to my paperwork for 6 months and wouldn't let me work. So, so I don't know how I'd be, whether I bought the Bitcoin or, so either way, I think it would have been about the same.
Yeah.
But there's something that the government, I think, could have quashed it, or, definitely did some things back in 2011, 12, 13. But at this point, the horses are out of the barn.
No, it's
It's
out.
not going
Well,
away.
when Ross first told me about Bitcoin, that was way before his arrest or anything. He was very interested in it. He was very involved. I said, well, should I get some? And he goes, no, Mom, it's too volatile. That was probably worth, 50 cents or something like that. So don't feel too bad.
Yeah, well now, yeah, and it was actually at the Nexus Earth conference is where I then, got because originally what I was trying to do is create this estate planning where people could then, hey, I got, because, we've learned a lesson from Ross of, don't try to skirt around the government's rules, because,
No,
they can get you. And so
Yes.
with people who, you've got, let's say, tens of millions of dollars of Bitcoin or crypto, and you bought it at next to nothing, or it was given to you at next to nothing, and now you want to bring that out into the economy. Well, how do you put it into a certain type of crypto trust? And so as Ernie came to me to be the guy that figured it out, and I figured it out, and I was going to be able to present. And at Nexus, I had just met with Colin like a month before, and they had such a star-studded lineup that, there's no way I was sneaking in there. And so Ernie's like, well, hey, I'll give you. So I was ready to present if, like, in the event somebody, stepped down or something. And then someone told me about how there's people doing Bitcoin IRAs and charging 15%. I'm like, that's ridiculous. So I ended up taking out like all the domain names, probably like the day after I met you, in terms of like the crypto. And then I realized this is a big thing, and basically devoted my being to trying to make this happen. And so I'm sort of like the rare person where, I've got the Federal Reserve background. I also have the, I've got the background on the cryptocurrencies. I got the background on the financial planning, got the background with, Donald Trump and libertarianism. So I'm sort of like that person that's all wrapped into Austrian economics. It's all sort of wrapped into one. And that's why I think, and also as someone who's a Christian, it's like, well, is it very conservative? What would Jesus do? Would Jesus want to, throw every drug user into jail? I mean, that doesn't sound very conservative. Would conservatives want to, spend trillions of dollars on something that has just made drugs cheaper and more accessible, been a complete failure, has actually caused more deaths, increased violence? And so all these different things that I think are not, really meshing with what, true, conservative. And again, I mean, the terms mean nothing. I mean, technically libertarians are classical liberals, but then today's liberals are not liberal, and conservatives don't really conserve anything. And we're arguing about, you've got, let's say tyranny over here and freedom all the way over here. And Ross is trying to get us extremely over here. And, all these, America, type guys who are out there, are arguing over like these slivers of freedom of like tiny degrees of never moving the ball forward. Whereas Ross is so far over here that these guys and girls would probably love Ross on 85% of the things that stood for. And so, it's like, you can't say freedom, but, I believe in complete freedom, but, and I guess the only but would be as long as you're not hurting anybody or causing violence or inciting violence. And there's a lot of proof to suggest that the media is trying to create a lot of violence right now. And then, quickly, I also want to Ross talk about the Federal Reserve. I just take a look at all the good that could be done through, having a completely free society. You'd have a lot less deaths, longer lifespan. So people are being killed because, and having opportunities taken away from them because there is this, we are not economically free. We're only free in name only right now. And with the Federal Reserve, someone told me it's private. I was like, you're full of crap. Researched it, realized I was wrong, and I don't like being wrong. I'm an Italian from New York. I never like being wrong. And then so I ended up realizing that I was wrong, and have been on this mission ever since. And really, it's high-tech slavery, is where if you create the first dollar that was ever created in existence, and now you owe interest on it. Well, the interest rate was 4% in 1913. So you owe, at the end of year one, you owe $1.04. Well, how do you ever pay back $1.04 with $1? You got to borrow another dollar and another dollar. And it creates this, we are high-tech slaves that are able to walk around a little bit with the illusion of freedom while saying we're free, with the most amount of people ever in jail,
prison. Yes. In the country, in the world. Yes.
And so it's just, for me, people, you might say I'm an extremist, and Mr. Conservative, who is, the the guy who wrote, I'm trying to think of his name right now, Barry Goldwater, who was Ron Paul's idol, wrote Conscience of his
A
newspaper,
conservative,
The
right?
Conscience of
Conscience of a
Conservative.
conservative, right?
And I have it on my banner, which I should know since I have it on my banner, but it says something like extremism in defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. And so what they're trying to say is that, yeah, I'm an extremist in terms of leave me alone. Like that's, so, libertarians are diligently plotting to take over the world to leave everybody alone. And I believe that's what your son
Yeah.
was trying to do. And
Yeah.
it gets messy, and the first use cases were in drugs. And just a quick PSA, if you want to buy drugs, probably the worst way to do it is using Bitcoin, because it is tracked. You can, it's not tracked down to the individual, but I know Ernie from freedomsphoenix.com has had dark data services on his program before, where they said, hey, we can track you down to the device level. And so they do all these other things, dragnet surveillance, where they can catch you. And so if you are doing bad things, you probably don't want to be using Bitcoin. And then now it came out that the NSA a few months ago is trying to track, I believe it's Zcash, and Monero is the other one they're trying to track right now. So if you're going to, sell drugs, don't use Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. And a recent study came out that someone sent me a link. I don't know what the percentage, I can't remember the percentage, but the percentage of illicit transactions with Bitcoin now is like really, really small. It's like in the low, it's not even in the teens. It's like in maybe 1% to 3%, which, anything, I mean, that's just human nature. And the government, I mean, just look at what used to be illegal in this country. I mean, at one point it used to be, basically being, black and voting was illegal. Being a woman and voting was illegal. I mean, so if you want to use morality and what's legal and not legal, I mean, I believe, Jesus was killed for doing something that was, quote unquote illegal, and what did he really do? He went and he flipped over the money changers table. And what Ross is trying to expose with the Federal Reserve is like 1 billion times worse than what was going on back in the biblical days. I mean, it makes them look like nothing. And unfortunately, it just breaks my heart to see that, when I post stuff about Ross, the first thing is, luckily now I feel like Google is a little bit better, which is weird for me saying that. It doesn't come up automatically with Hitman when I Google search Ross anymore,
Oh, that's good to hear.
which it used to.
Yeah, I still deal with it all the time, because, it's like, well, what are you basing this on? You're basing, and other things they say, people just say stuff. They make stuff up.
Or they hear it like in passing, just like, a lot of people don't really listen to the news, or not, deeply immersed in the news, but then they hear, oh yeah, well, Trump, he's a traitor and he did all this stuff and Russia hacked the election.
Right.
And that's a whole nother topic of whether, Seth Rich and who people passing off information, and how and even Kim.com is out here saying, there's no way it was, it was all like an internal inside job. And then, I mean, I reached 10% what the Russians did by myself as a nobody, and then got shut down basically the day after I had fake news go viral. I created the page August 27th. By October, there was only maybe 2,000 people following it. Then it exploded, getting 1,200 new people a day subscribing. But it wasn't about me. I just wanted to get the messages out there. But it's like, hey, this guy's, a thought criminal. So we need to, because people like me and like your son are honestly more dangerous to the system than just about anybody, because they want
Well, that's what the judge said. She said, we know it's all about a philosophy, and she called it troubling and dangerous. I find it troubling and dangerous that a judge would violate the First Amendment and use it in a sentencing to put someone in a cage for the rest of his life. But she finds free markets and liberty and voluntary exchange troubling and dangerous.
Yeah, so if you really want to stick it to the Democrats and
Schumer, don't forget Schumer. You can get Schumer.
That's how you can do it. And I think getting back to as we wrap this up here, how we can help your son out and how we can try to get at the president. It seems like one of the guys that's I hate to say thought leader is Kanye West. Maybe there can be some sort of marriage between the crypto community and Kanye West, even if it's I guess actually his marriage.
I think he has some crypto. I think I read that he had some Bitcoin.
And so maybe, I don't know how we try to get, but maybe there's some coordinated effort where, the people who signed the petition, we say, hey, for this week, we all pledge to buy some obscure Kanye song, or maybe there's a Kanye song about, drug addiction or something that we can go look up after. I didn't do the research beforehand, just sort of came to me. If we, have some sort of coordinated tweet effort at Kanye West or at, Kim Kardashian and Donald Trump, and just make it a big thing. And he did, I forgot the name of the documentary. It was basically on all the media, yellow journalism type tactics that were going on. And he tweeted this out. And this was like a real hardcore Creature from Jekyll Island type documentary that Kanye, it was Prisoner of Self, or man, it's going to drive me nuts. Century of Self, I believe it was called. And it just gets into, all the propaganda techniques that the media's use to control people from way back when. So, Kanye does have an open, say what you will about him, obviously don't, endorse everything he says, but, he is a guy who has the ear of the president.
And he cares about criminal justice reform and people who are being wrongly caged for too long. I have to hand it to him and Kim Kardashian. I mean, and for them to influence having Alice Johnson sentence commuted. But, why are we paying for a grandmother who made a mistake? 22 years ago. Please, I'm not afraid of her. I don't need to be protected from her. She's, so I do respect them for that. And it's a fight that we should all have, so.
All right, so just remember to head to freeross.org, so org, not .com, where you can go and
go there, but yeah,
you can go and find the petitions on there. There's a take action site. There's a must read section where it has all the all the different documents that go through and timeline the case. And I'd also highly recommend, even if you think you know a lot about this case, you probably don't if you haven't watched Railroaded. I thought I knew a lot. I mean, I heard several interviews with David Knight. I mean, Ernest Hancock's one of my best friends. I mean, that we've talked in person, and there was stuff that I learned from there. And I thought, hey, it was right around Christmas time, a lot of things going on. And I figured, okay, I'll pop one of these in. And then next thing I know, I end up, listening to the whole thing straight through, because it was that compelling about what was going on. And I'm the type of guy that doesn't believe anything and think that everything is corrupt. And I'm like, this even shocks me, the level of corruption that was going on. And I already knew about the jailed agents, and I already knew about, a lot of that stuff. And I knew about the false hitman charges. And I was there when you and Curtis were talking. That I snuck away to something else, but the guy I was rooming with, was telling me that was going on. And so I mean, just check this out. I mean, we're not saying that, we expect you to agree with everything Ross did or helped enable, but what the media portrays that he did versus what he really did are two separate things. I think that getting at Donald Trump probably is the best way to help him. And just I haven't asked Donald Trump for a lot of things. I haven't asked you for very much. Well, I guess I have. I've asked you to end the Federal Reserve and go on all the wars and all this other unreasonable nonviolent things to end. But could you at least throw us a bone and try to because there are people in the liberty community that did a lot, stuck their necks out there, because I had people getting pissed off. I mean, the Democrats who obviously pissed at me for certain reasons, the Republicans pissed at me for other reasons, libertarians mad at me for ditching them to vote for Trump. So it's just sort of like if you haven't been offended yet by me, just stick around long enough, because eventually I'll get to you. But
you're not going to ever offend me, Tim.
But I think with your son though, it's it's just really, it's heartbreaking. And I do think that if there ever is a chance for him to get out, it would be right now. And so now
I
is
agree.
the time.
I agree. I think Donald Trump is the president. I think that he's open-minded enough and can see things from his gut. He said, I go for my gut. I think he can see it. And so I do. I think this is it. And, we have a lot of the same enemies. So
that is for sure.
Anyone who can help me to get that message to him, I'd be very grateful. And I'm very easily reached on freeross.org. On the bottom, there's a contact link, or you can always reach me through the website. So, yeah. Yep,
so freeross.org. And thank you for joining us, especially on this historic day, being the 10th anniversary.
Great conversation. We covered a lot. So, thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Why would anybody want to buy Bitcoin inside their IRA? I mean, the whole point of Bitcoin was to have peer-to-peer electronic cash. So why are you going to have a financial intermediary buy Bitcoin for you? Why don't you just cash out your 401k, cash out your IRA, cash out your retirement plan, and just buy Bitcoin on your own? Well, the reason for that is if somebody had January 1st, 2017, invested $100,000 into Bitcoin, and then 1 year later, they would have had, after taxes and the 10% penalty, they would have just under $900,000. So you would have turned $100,000 into close to $900,000. So you're obviously doing something right. However, there is a better way that they could have done it. What they could have done is they could have done a Roth conversion, With the Roth conversion, you save the 10% penalty, so you've got 10% more that can be invested into crypto. And the beauty of this is that now all of your gains are now forever tax-free. So you put the $100,000 in, and now, and again, you're getting out of paying the 10% penalty, and now after even all my management fees, you now have a little over $1 million. We have all the exact specific numbers linked down, or should be on the screen right now. I don't have it memorized, but to me, $1 million sounds a little bit better than $900,000, and having tax-free gains forever sounds better than having $900,000 that now any appreciation or hopeful potential appreciation would then be subject to tax. And the other reason why we thought of this, or really the genesis of this, is I'd heard a lot of people doing this, and I thought that, hey, there's got to be a better way. But the main reason is you've got a lot of people who the only money they have to invest is inside of their retirement accounts. A lot of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, even people who have $1 million IRAs, a lot of them don't have actual extra money to invest. They don't have rainy day funds. And the rainy day funds should be kept in actual safe, liquid, basically cash or really short-term treasury bills. It shouldn't be invested into Bitcoin. And so a lot of people just don't have that extra money to invest. And so taking a small percentage of your IRA or 401k and then, putting it into Bitcoin, if you know what you're doing and you understand the risk and you actually believe in this philosophically, is actually, I think, a good move to make. So again, if you're going to pull money out of your 401k to buy Bitcoin, you should talk to myself, because I think that the Roth IRA conversion is a much better way of doing things, and that is why somebody would want to consider having Bitcoin inside their IRA as opposed to cashing out their 401k and just buying it outright. Okay, well, that's great. You've got people who have IRAs and 401ks, and there's different things you can do or that I can do to help them out. But what about the person that has maybe a few $1 million of gains and they bought it on Coinbase or Kraken, or they got several millions of dollars of gains, and all of a sudden now you want to go buy your Lambo or buy a new house? I mean, there's no way you're going to be able to skirt around the IRS, because they're going to wonder, hey, how'd you get that $500,000 to buy a new house? Well, for those people, probably the best person to explain this is actually my friend Ernest Hancock, as he was giving me an introduction at Anarchapulco. Anyways, I'll let Ernie take it away, because we can also have advanced trust strategies for the people that have millions of dollars of gains. This is not just for people who are looking to invest parts of their IRAs or 401k.
A good friend of mine, Tim Pachote, he's a financial advisor at Scottsdale. He'll be speaking at the TDV event. You'd be able to bring the crypto into the system. How would you be able to do a foundation of trust, of this, of that, and so on? And Tim was at the party, and I go, Tim, what up? He's been spending months that he's getting ready to present to you guys Monday on how you can take your crypto and not pay capital gains on it, not have taxes on it. I'm going, man, you need to talk to Tim.